At 63, Ralph Fiennes isn't chasing roles. He's reflecting on the artists who shaped his soul. From fearless rebels to quiet masters of the craft, these 6 actors aren't just favorites. They're part of his DNA. These are the names that still haunt him and still guide him. Vanessa Redgrave, the firebrand of British early stage and screen. Ralph Fiennes has worked with some of the greatest actors in history, but when it comes to influence, none hold a deeper place in his heart than Vanessa Redgrave. For Fiennes, she wasn't just another screen legend. She was, and still is, a symbol of artistic courage. Long before they shared the screen, he was studying her performances, watching in awe as she took on Shakespeare with a raw intensity few could match. She wasn't just acting, he once said. She was surviving out loud. As a student at RADA, Fiennes would sit in dark theaters watching Redgrave perform with fearless abandon, pushing herself emotionally and physically on stage. In a world of polished actors, Redgrave stood out like a flame, wild, unfiltered, and politically defiant. Her performances were never just about characters, they were about truth, often uncomfortable, always urgent. It wasn't until 2011, decades later, that Fiennes got the chance to work with her directly. In Coriolanus, a modernized Shakespeare adaptation he both directed and starred in, Redgrave played his mother. Their scenes were electric. Off-screen, he had to balance the pressures of directing with the humility of acting beside someone he had revered for most of his adult life. The result? One of the most intense and emotionally charged performances of his career. Fiennes later reflected on their collaboration, saying, "She gave me more than a performance. She gave me her trust." And it shows. In every frame there's a tension, a closeness, a kind of artistic intimacy that feels earned. You can see how much he's drawing from her, the way he listens, the way he reacts, even the pauses between words. It's like watching a master and a disciple perform the same ritual. But Redgrave's influence on Fiennes goes far beyond technique. It's political. She's never been afraid to use her platform to speak out against war, against oppression, even if it made her unpopular. That defiance struck a chord with Fiennes, who has long believed that acting can and should intersect with activism. "Vanessa taught me that art is never neutral," he once said. "It has to choose a side." Perhaps that's why, even now, he still speaks about her with a kind of reverent energy. To Fiennes, Redgrave represents the kind of artist who lives completely inside her convictions. She doesn't just transform into characters, she transforms the world around her, even if it comes at a cost. And that bravery, that moral spine, is something he's tried to carry into every role he's taken since. So when people ask Fiennes who inspired him the most, who shaped his sense of character, both on screen and off, he doesn't hesitate. He says her name with the weight of history, Vanessa Redgrave. Not just a legend, a fire that never went out. Meryl Streep, the master technician. If Vanessa Redgrave gave Ralph Fiennes a blueprint for emotional bravery, Meryl Streep gave him something else entirely. Craft, precision, the kind of detail that turns performance into something surgical. For Fiennes, Streep wasn't just great, she was operating on another level. "She's untouchable," he once said. What she does, it's like watching a magician who refuses to show her tricks. The irony? They've never shared a scene together. But they nearly did. Back in the 90s, when The English Patient was in pre-production, Meryl Streep was considered for the role that Juliette Binoche eventually played. It would have been a dream pairing, two titans from different schools of acting colliding in one of the most romantic films of its era. Fiennes has said that even the thought of working opposite her made him nervous. "I wasn't sure I could keep up," he joked. What impressed him most about Streep wasn't just her reputation, it was the transformation. Each time she took on a new role, she vanished. Not just behind wigs or accents, but inside the psychology of a character. From Sophie's Choice to Doubt, from the Iron Lady to The Devil Wears Prada, she never repeated herself. Fiennes has called that the ultimate discipline, to not lean on what worked last time. But it wasn't only her performances that influenced him. It was how she carried herself in the business. Streep never chased celebrity. She stayed private, stayed focused, and let the work speak. That was something Fiennes paid close attention to. In an industry that rewards noise and visibility, Streep chose the quiet lane and still became a global icon. Fiennes admired that deeply. He's often said that the best actors aren't the loudest. They're the ones who listen. And Streep, to him, is the ultimate listener. She holds space, he once explained. When you watch her scenes, she's not dominating, she's responding. That's where the truth is. Even though they've never acted together, her impact on him is clear. You can see it in how he approaches subtlety, the stillness in his eyes, the restraint in his gestures. Watching Streep taught him that emotional weight doesn't need to be shouted. It can be whispered and still hit just as hard. To this day, Fiennes keeps returning to her work, not to copy it, but to learn from it. Because to him, Meryl Streep is more than a performer. She's a standard, a reminder that talent alone isn't enough. It's what you do with it, quietly, consistently, year after year. So even without a shared screen, her presence looms large in his story. She's the North Star of technique, always there, just slightly out of reach. And maybe that's what makes her great. Anthony Hopkins, The Quiet Storm. If Meryl Streep represents mastery through transformation, then Anthony Hopkins taught Ralph Fiennes the power of stillness, how not acting can sometimes say the most. Fiennes has always admired actors who hold something back, who trust the silence. And in Hopkins, he saw someone who could control a room with just a look. Long before they occupied the same cinematic universe of iconic villains, Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, Fiennes as Lord Voldemort, Ralph was a fan. As a young actor, he was captivated by Hopkins's haunting performances in The Elephant Man and The Remains of the Day. "He doesn't perform," Fiennes once said, "he invites you in. It's like watching someone remember something too painful to say out loud." They never shared the screen directly, but their careers ran parallel in meaningful ways. Both brought deep humanity to dark characters, villains who weren't just evil, but eerie, elegant, and deeply internal. Hopkins gave Lecter a quiet dignity that terrified you more than any outburst could. Fiennes carried that same idea into Voldemort, the whisper instead of the scream, the pause instead of the punch. One of the biggest lessons Fiennes took from Hopkins was the art of doing less. "He lets you lean in," Fiennes said. "He's not chasing the moment. He's letting it land." It's that sense of emotional control that Fiennes began to adopt more in his own performances, particularly in films like The Constant Gardener and Schindler's List, where inner turmoil simmers just under the surface. Hopkins also taught him how to age with grace in an industry that often discards older actors. In his later work, especially The Father, for which he won an Oscar at age 83, Hopkins didn't soften. He sharpened. He leaned deeper into vulnerability, proving that age isn't a limitation in art, but an advantage. Fiennes deeply respects how Hopkins never turned his back on theater. returning to the stage throughout his career, even as a global film star. That dual loyalty to cinema and stage is something Fiennes lives by himself. Both actors see Shakespeare not just as history, but as a living language, one that teaches new things with each pass. Perhaps the most powerful thing Fiennes learned from Hopkins wasn't technical at all. It was presence. The way Hopkins enters a scene like he's lived in it for years. The way he trusts the moment, trusts his audience. That quiet confidence, that storm beneath the surface, became a compass for how Fiennes carries himself as an actor. In Hopkins, he didn't just see talent, he saw wisdom, and in many ways, he still does. Kristin Scott Thomas, the eternal scene partner. Of all the actors Ralph Fiennes has worked with, Kristin Scott Thomas may be the one he knows most intimately. Their on-screen chemistry in The English Patient was so palpable, so tragically romantic, that people still talk about it decades later. But what many don't know is that their connection goes much deeper than a single film. It's a creative partnership that has lasted through time. Fiennes has called her the most fearless scene partner I've ever had. And it's easy to see why. In The English Patient, she brought a fierce internal fire to the role of Catherine, a woman torn between duty and desire. Fiennes, as the wounded, love-struck Almasy, had to match that intensity without ever overpowering it. What emerged was a rare kind of balance. Two performances locked together in emotional rhythm. But their bond didn't end there. Over the years, Fiennes and Scott Thomas reunited on multiple projects, both on screen and stage. Every time, the trust was instant. They didn't have to rehearse emotional connection, it was already there. With Kristin, Fiennes once said, "You don't act, you respond. It's like jazz." That familiarity gave Fiennes something priceless: freedom. With Scott Thomas, he didn't have to second-guess or perform. He could take risks. He could be vulnerable. In scenes that required pain or intimacy, he knew she'd catch him, not judge him. One of the most powerful aspects of their relationship is how it evolved off-screen as well. They've remained close friends, and that personal trust has continued to inform their professional work. During emotionally heavy scenes, they'd often check in with each other after takes. A quiet word, a shared glance, ensuring they both felt safe in the emotional space they were diving into. Fiennes has often credited Scott Thomas with shaping his understanding of romance on screen. Before working with her, he'd done dramatic roles, intense roles, but never one that captured love in all its contradictions: passion, guilt, longing, regret. She taught him how to play the in-between spaces, the silence between sentences, the look before the kiss. Behind the scenes, there were moments of real emotional weight. During a particularly brutal shoot day, Scott Thomas reportedly broke down after a scene, and Fiennes stayed beside her, holding her hand in silence. That kind of emotional vulnerability between actors is rare and deeply powerful. Today, whenever Fiennes speaks about The English Patient, his tone softens. You can hear the affection, the nostalgia, the respect. Kristin Scott Thomas wasn't just a co-star, she was, and remains, a collaborator, a friend, and a mirror. Someone who brought out the best in him simply by being brave enough to go there with him. Their partnership wasn't built on fame or career strategy. It was built on trust. And that kind of trust, it doesn't fade. Daniel Day-Lewis, The Phantom of Commitment. If Ralph Fiennes ever believed in ghosts, it might be because of Daniel Day-Lewis, not as a person, but as a presence. an actor so deeply immersed in his characters that he vanishes into them completely. For Fiennes, Day-Lewis wasn't just a peer. He was a mystery, a reminder of what true artistic devotion looks like. "He disappears," Fiennes once said, "and when he returns, he's someone else entirely." They've never worked together, at least not on screen, but the admiration runs deep. Fiennes has spoken about watching My Left Foot for the first time and being absolutely floored. "It wasn't just impressive," he recalled. "It was spirit-breaking. You realized this wasn't acting, this was something holy." That performance, and so many others, There Will Be Blood, Lincoln, The Boxer, left a permanent impression on Fiennes. What he admired wasn't just the commitment to the craft, it was the sacrifice behind it. Day-Lewis would often live as his characters for months, sometimes years. He'd refuse to break accent, stay in costume off camera, and disappear from public view entirely. To many, that level of immersion might seem extreme, but to Fiennes, it was proof that acting could still be sacred, something pure, something untouched by fame. He reminds you that acting isn't about being liked, Fiennes said. It's about telling the hardest truth you can bear to say out loud. There was also a quiet elegance to how Day-Lewis handled his success. No red carpet ego, no scandal, no brand deals. Just a man and his work. Then, nothing. He famously retired in 2017 after Phantom Thread, choosing silence over spectacle. Fiennes deeply respected that move. In an industry obsessed with visibility, Day-Lewis chose invisibility. He left at the top, not because he had to, but because he wanted to protect the thing that made him great, his relationship with the work. That decision echoed with Fiennes, who's also known for stepping away from the spotlight, often favoring stage over film, or taking years between major projects. In Day-Lewis, he saw a reflection of his own internal struggle, that pull between creation and burnout, between ambition and peace. Fiennes has often said that he studies Day-Lewis's performances the way others study scripture. Not to imitate them, but to understand the depth of silence, the power of restraint, and the danger of going too far. Because with Day-Lewis, there's always a risk that you might not come back from who you've become. And maybe that's why Fiennes calls him a phantom. Not because he's absent, but because he's everywhere, quietly influencing how actors think, feel, and work. Even in retirement, Daniel Day-Lewis continues to haunt the craft in the best way possible. For Ralph Fiennes, he's not just a benchmark. He's a myth, and in the myth of Day-Lewis, Fiennes found a standard of purity he never stops chasing. Juliette Binoche, the muse of mystery. When Ralph Fiennes talks about his most intimate roles, there's always one name that slips out with a certain tenderness: Juliette Binoche. Their work together in The English Patient didn't just win Oscars. It created a kind of emotional time capsule, frozen in cinematic history. But what Fiennes remembers most isn't the awards. It's her presence. "She's magnetic," he once said, "and unknowable. You never feel like you've fully reached her, and that's what makes her so real." Binoche didn't just play opposite Fiennes. She challenged him. She was intuitive, instinctual, almost unpredictable in her choices. That forced him out of his comfort zone. Fiennes, a classically trained actor who often leaned on structure, found himself reacting to something fluid, alive, and completely in the moment. It terrified him, and it thrilled him. Their on-screen dynamic, his wounded vulnerability, her gentle strength, created something audiences could feel even in silence. Many critics wondered if there was something real happening between them behind the scenes. Fiennes never confirmed anything, but the emotional intimacy was unmistakable. It wasn't romantic drama. It was something deeper, recognition between two souls. Binoche came from a different world, a European cinema tradition that valued emotional texture over plot. Working with her opened Fiennes' eyes to new creative territory. Soon after, he began pursuing more international projects, seeking out directors like Fernando Meirelles, Luca Guadagnino, and even starring in Russian-language films. That shift wasn't random. It was inspired by artists like Binoche, actors who saw performance as a global conversation, not a commercial product. Fiennes once said that Binoche had a way of making even the quietest scene feel like a secret being shared. She whispers, and the whole room leans in, he said. That's what I learned from her, that you don't need to push. You just need to be present. He also admired how she moved through the industry with grace, avoiding the fame machine and choosing roles based on instinct, not strategy. She never chased blockbusters or tried to brand herself. She simply followed the work, and the work followed her. That kind of quiet defiance made a lasting impression on Fiennes, who's tried to model his career with a similar authenticity. Even years later, Fiennes speaks about Binoche with softness, like someone remembering a letter they never sent. She wasn't just a co-star. She was a kind of creative mirror, showing him parts of himself he hadn't yet accessed. In Binoche, he found more than a muse. He found a reminder that some performances don't end with the film. They linger. They ripple through every role that comes after. And for Fiennes, she remains a whisper in the back of his mind. Not loud, not obvious, but always there. The Shakespeare influence, shared souls in the Bard. If there's a language that connects all the actors Ralph Fiennes admires, a thread that runs deeper than fame or technique, it's Shakespeare. The Bard is more than just literature to Fiennes. He's a spiritual anchor, a mirror to the soul, and a sacred challenge every serious actor must eventually face. For Fiennes, Shakespeare isn't something you perform, it's something you surrender to. Throughout his career, Fiennes has returned to Shakespeare again and again, both on stage and on screen. But he hasn't done it alone. Many of the actors he holds closest, Vanessa Redgrave, Anthony Hopkins, Kristen Scott Thomas, have walked that same path. It's no coincidence. He calls them his Shakespeare kin. Redgrave was one of the first who made him believe Shakespeare could be radical. She didn't treat it like a museum piece. She attacked it with passion, politics, and conviction. Watching her command the stage gave Fiennes a new understanding of what these centuries-old texts could be. Alive, dangerous, and deeply relevant. Then came Hopkins, a man whose voice alone could stop time. Fiennes was deeply influenced by Hopkins's work at the National Theatre, particularly his portrayal of characters like King Lear and Titus Andronicus. He doesn't overcomplicate it, Fiennes once said. He lets the words carry the weight, and that's the bravest thing you can do. Hopkins taught him that the greatest Shakespeare performances often come from clarity, not embellishment. And with Kristen Scott Thomas, the connection was almost telepathic. They shared a rhythm, a sense of timing that only comes from years of classical training. Whether on stage or screen, their scenes often felt like choreographed duets, not rehearsed, but lived in. Shakespeare gave them a shared vocabulary, a kind of emotional shorthand. It wasn't about technique, it was about trusting the text and each other. One of Fiennes' most personal projects was his directorial debut, Coriolanus, in 2011. A modern warfare take on a Roman tragedy, it starred Fiennes himself as the title character, and Vanessa Redgrave as his mother. The film was intense, brutal, political, and deeply Shakespearean. But more importantly, it was a love letter to the actors who shaped him. Fiennes wasn't just making a movie, he was building a bridge between generations of Shakespearean performers. "I've always believed Shakespeare reveals your essence," Fiennes said in an interview. "You can't fake it. You either step into the fire or you don't." That idea, that the bard strips you bare, is something he holds close. And the actors he loves most are the ones willing to be stripped down, to be challenged by the language instead of hiding behind it. What ties all these actors together isn't just that they've done Shakespeare, it's that they've lived through it. They've been broken by it, healed by it, transformed by it. That kind of shared experience forms a quiet bond between them, something beyond credits or awards. It's almost spiritual. Fiennes has said that every time he returns to Shakespeare, it feels like coming home. And when he works with others who speak that same language, there's an instant connection. They don't need to explain their process. They just feel it. In a way, Shakespeare becomes their common prayer, a ritual that brings out the best and worst in each of them. And that's why, when Fiennes talks about the actors he loves most, Shakespeare is never far behind. Because in the end, it's not just about the plays. It's about the bravery it takes to stand inside them, to speak those ancient words and make them new again. For Fiennes, those who dare to do that are family. In naming these 6, Ralph Fiennes wasn't just honoring actors, he was revealing himself. Each one left a fingerprint on his journey, shaping the man behind the roles. And now, as he looks back, their influence remains. Quiet, powerful, and permanent. Because great actors never truly leave us.